So next, we're going to learn about setting up our own module settings. What we've been doing so far for our better occupancy calculation is to just use the UMI provided occupant density. But the point of our module is to use better occupant densities that we feel are more accurate. So we're going to learn how to do that. And our initial implementation is going to allow a user to specify an occupant density for each template in the UMI project that will override the occupant density that is already set in that template. Now, from a realistic perspective, this doesn't make a lot of useful sense because the user could just update the occupant density in the template itself. But for learning purposes, this is how we're going to organize our project. We're going to allow the user to specify these overrides. Now, these settings are basically per project settings, right? When you load an UMI project, you'll have this set of occupant density overrides that is specific to that project and get saved with that project. And if you send the project to someone else, they'll see those. But these settings aren't on a per building basis. We want to specify an override on a per template basis. So the level we're looking at is project settings. So UMI can handle these fairly simply. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a new type to hold our settings. So I will right click on the project, UMI.BetterOccupancyDemo, and I will go to add a new item. And I'll just pick Visual C# class. This is going to be a simple object, nothing fancy. Okay. And we're just going to call it project settings. Actually, let's call it better occupancy project settings to make it clear that this is part of our better occupancy module. And Visual Studio created a completely empty class for us. And we're going to start populating it with the settings we need. And we only really need one set of settings, and that is these overrides. So I'm going to start creating that. And it's going to be in the form of a dictionary, which is a data structure that allows you to look up one value and get an associated value. And we'll call it better occupant densities. Let's say by template to make it even more clear what it is we're doing. And then I type get set, which just means that we can both read and write this value. And then I'll give it a initialization, which says whenever we create a new settings object, just create a new empty dictionary. So what we've done is we've said that our better occupancy project settings has one setting, which is this dictionary that maps from template names to occupant densities. This is an override. Okay. That dictionary is called better occupant densities by template. We can read and write it. And when we create a new one of these objects, populate it with an empty dictionary that has no overrides in it. This is, now let's see how each of these parts work inside the actual code. So let's save this file and let's go to our calculate better occupancy. Okay. What we want to do is we want to, instead of using the UMI occupant density, we want to use the one from our override. So let's learn how to do that. The first thing we need to do is we need to load these settings out of the UMI project. Now you might think, but we haven't actually set those settings anywhere, and you're correct. But we're gonna see how they're used before we go into how you actually set them, because that second part is a little more complicated. So the name of our object is better occupancy project settings, and that's important because that's how we're going to tell UMI how to get that item. Okay. And like everything else, you get it out of the UMI context object. So we'll say our occupant densities. Well, let's just say project settings. Context.get module project settings. .get, and then the type of our settings object was better occupancy project settings. So what this says is, hey, UMI, go get me this settings object for this project from this module project settings. Okay. Now, For each building, what we want to do is we want to see if we have an override specified for that building's template. And if we do, then we want to use that override. Otherwise, we can just use the occupant density that UMI is providing to us. Okay. But what we say is we say project settings dot try or dot better occupant densities by template dot try get value. And again, Visual Studio is being very helpful, although not that helpful. Okay, I do want to try get a value. Okay, and the key is the template name for this building, which can be found in building dot template name. Okay. Out occupant density. Oh. We're actually just going to not use the template occupant density at all. We're going to require them to specify overrides because that's a little bit easier to do. Okay. So this says for those project settings, get that dictionary, right? This is that dictionary that does the mapping from template names to overrides. Okay. Get that dictionary and try to get a value out of it. Okay. And that value is going to be the template name of this building, and we're going to put the result into this new occupant density variable, which is the same one we were using before to calculate occupancy. So that part doesn't change. Now we have a green squiggle. Let's see what it is. Okay. Possible null reference assignment, or possible null reference argument for parameter key. So what this is telling you is that Visual Studio is warning me, and it's saying, hey, there might not be a template name. Some buildings don't have template assignments. It's not supposed to happen under normal UMI use, but it can. And as a module developer, you need to be aware of that. And if the template is unassigned, you do need to do something about it, because if you try to look up this null value, your module won't work correctly. So all we're going to do is we're going to say, if our building doesn't have a template, don't calculate an occupancy for it, because there's no template assignment. We don't really know what it's supposed to be doing. So we'll go up here and we'll say if building.template name is null, continue. And continue is just a C# keyword that says, if you're inside a loop, just go back to the top and skip what you were doing. So when we hit the continue keyword, it means skip all this stuff and just go on to the next building. There's no template assignment. We can't calculate an occupancy. Just don't worry about it. And the green squiggle went away because now Visual Studio can see this isn't null. Because if it were null, we wouldn't be here in the first place. So this says, okay, go get the override for that template name and use that occupant density itself. Right? The way try get value works is that if it can't find it, it will just use the default value for this data type, which is 0. So what this will do is if there is no template name in the override list in our settings here, if that hasn't been specified, just use an occupant density of 0, which means the calculated occupancies should always be 0. Since we don't yet have a way to set those overrides, that's what should happen. So let's just go ahead and make sure that that's happening. Our module isn't complete, but we're just going to validate that we understand the way things are working so far. So we'll launch Rhino 7. Load our project. And we will run our command and see what happens. So we should, again, see a 0 occupancy for every building because we don't have any occupancy override set or occupant density override set. And so they should be using 0 for all of them. Let's try it. Oh, no, we got an exception, right? So we had our debugger attached to Rhino, and this is why we do it. So that when we get an exception like this, we can catch it in real time and see what the issue is and explore our program to try to understand what the problem is. And there's a user unhandled exception. And here's the message. No registration for settings type, better occupancy project settings. And what's going on here is that if you want to create a custom project settings type for your module, which is a good idea in almost every case, you need to tell UMI about it ahead of time. And the reason for that is that UMI needs to know how to save and load your settings from the UMI bundle, from that .umi file. So you need to give it some upfront notification. For the version of the project template that you installed for this workshop, that facility is not handled for you. Future versions of that template, if they do exist, might do this automatically, but for now we have to do it ourselves. So we got an exception. Okay, let's just continue. We can't do anything about it, so we'll just let Rhino continue. The command didn't work, but that's fine. That's expected. So we'll close this, and we'll add that settings registration that we're supposed to. And the place we're going to do that is inside this module.cs file. So this one over here. And this is, again, the sort of top level description of your module in a lot of ways. It has a lot of things like the tab header tooltip. And this is also where you would specify a module settings registration. So what we're going to do is we're going to put our cursor on module here. And we're going to right click it. And we're going to go to quick actions and refactorings. And we're going to go to generate overrides. And what we're doing is we're overriding some default behavior of an UMI module. The default behavior is that there are no project level settings. We're going to override that and create some. So it creates this window. Make sure these are all deselected. If you have to, go ahead and click deselect all. Okay. And then check one of them, project settings handlers. And this is, we're going to specify that we want some project settings for our module. So make sure this is the only one checked, and then hit OK. And it will generate some code. It might be hard to find. For me, it put it on line 39. This public override IEnumerable iModule project settings handler, and then this base.project settings handlers. And this is what we're going to change. So we delete this. And we type get. And we're going to yield return. Visual Studio is again being sort of helpful, but not really that helpful. New default project settings handler. And then inside the angle brackets, we're going to put the type of our settings object, which is better occupancy project settings. And it's complaining. Let's see what it's complaining about. Oh, we need to give it the name of the file this will be saved to. We'll call it better occupancy.json. You will never actually open this file up or read it, so it doesn't really matter what you put here as long as no other module is using the same value. So that's why I called it better occupancy.json. You wouldn't want to call this, for example, energy.json, because there's a very good chance that another UMI module is using this file. So just give it, something will be unique like this. You could even put your name in here if you wanted. And this basically, what you're doing is you're having your module request to UMI, hey, I have the settings file I need you to keep track of for me. And it's going to store these settings. So now what we tried before should work correctly. Let's give it a shot. We go to modules and we run, and we should get all zeros, and there we do. Okay, so it calculated the occupancy for all of our buildings using our overrides, but we hadn't set any, so it calculated it as 0 for all of them. Pretty good. Save that. And again, the way you solve that last problem was you create this override for project settings handlers. Visual Studio will help you with this bit. And you say get, and you have it yield return a new default project settings handler with this type in a file name. But we never specified how to actually write these.